All right, so we now have item 4B, a briefing on the water fluoridation report. Philip Wong, HHSD Medical Director, Chris Harrington, PE, Watershed Protection Department, Jane Barazer, Assistant Director of Austin Water Utility, Olga Hernandez from Health and Human Services, and Charlie Maddox from the Water Utility. What I want to do is get the staff presentation first, and then we'll have citizens communication after we have had some conversation about the report. Welcome, Ms. Barazer.
Thank you, Chair. I believe you all have received the copy of the report, so the briefing that I'm going to give is just kind of a summary of what the report did. Assistant City Manager Rudy Garza assembled an internal City of Austin team to review fluoridation, water fluoridation. Representation was requested from the Austin-Travis County Health and Human Services Department to address the health concerns from water fluoridation, Austin Water Utility to address water fluoridation practices as compared to industry practices, Watershed Protection Department to address environmental impacts, and the Law Department to define options following a public referendum. Essentially, I'm going to go over some of what's in the executive summary to put on the table for everybody here. In 1951, the U.S. Public Health Service began promoting water fluoridation as a public health initiative to reduce and prevent tooth loss and cavities. The percentage of the population being served optimally fluoridated water has continued to grow from 62.1% in 1992 to 69.2% in 2006. Since 2000, 16 additional communities in Texas have initiated water fluoridation. Many major U.S. cities add fluoride to their drinking water, including Boston, New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, Dallas, San Antonio, and Phoenix. Today, the Center for Disease Control continues to promote water fluoridation and has listed it as one of 10 great public health achievements of the 20th century. The CDC's recommended level of fluoridation, and what's defined as optimally fluoridated, is between 0.7 milligrams per liter to 1.2 milligrams per liter. And I have a tendency to switch between milligrams per liter and parts per million, but they're the same thing, so I just thought I'd state that. The Texas Department of State Health Services supports water fluoridation. Many national medical associations continue to endorse water fluoridation, including the American Dental Association, American Medical Association, the Academy of General Dentists, Surgeon General, the American Academy of Family Physicians, and the American Public Health Association. The medical director of the Austin-Travis County Health and Human Services Department concurs with the CDC and other major dental and health groups on supporting community water fluoridation. And a quote from his portion of the paper was, "Water fluoridation has undergone extensive scientific review to assess the public health benefits and risks. The CDC has also noted that the weight of peer-reviewed scientific evidence does not support an association between water fluoridation and any adverse health effects or systemic disorder. The City of Austin's Watershed Protection Department has evaluated impacts of fluoridation on the environment and determined, in quotes, at the present level of fluoride addition, there does not appear to be a strong potential for adverse aquatic life impacts. However, the fluoridation of drinking water does contribute additional fluoride to streams. The scientific evaluation of the need for continued fluoridation should be made on the basis of human health." The Austin Water Utility began adding fluoride to the water February 2nd, 1973, per the public referendum vote. AW practices, best practices established for fluoridation. We use a control range of 0.6 to 0.9 milligrams per liter, with our actual annual average last year at 0.7 milligrams per liter, which is within the CDC guidelines. The U.S. EPA maximum contaminant level to ensure no adverse health effects is 4.0 milligrams per liter, and their secondary standard is at 2.0 milligrams per liter. The secondary standard is not enforceable. It's done as more as an aesthetic issue to prevent dental fluorosis. Austin Water Utility is inspected by the Texas Fluoridation Project, which is part of the Texas Department of State Health Services, for compliance with the engineering and administrative recommendations for water fluoridation established by CDC. The water utility utilizes hydrofluorosilicate, complying with National Sanitation Foundation Standard 60 to ensure purity of product used and the compatibility in a drinking water environment. Fluoride costs have increased annually to a current level of $7.25 per million gallons of water treated, or 7.9% of our total chemical budget. This is a cost of about 50 cents per person per year for fluoridation, and actual cost of $386,538.94 for 2009. National averages for large systems range from 50 cents to 90 cents per person per year. So we're at the lower end of the normal range. Estimated dental health cost savings from water fluoridation was $18.62 per person per year in large communities, based on a study by the Texas Department of State Health Services. There are others indicating a greater savings. If the City Council desires to change its decision on fluoridation, it can do so by a simple majority vote of at least 4. There's a lot more detail in the full report. It was 17 pages, so I didn't figure it was advisable to read that. I'm here representing the Austin Water Utility. Dr. Philip Wong is here representing the Austin-Travis County Health and Human Services. And Chris Harrington is here to represent Watershed Protection Department, I'm sorry.
Thank you, Ms. Barazer. So do we have questions from the board at this point? Mr. Moncada.
I actually had the opportunity to talk to Ms. Barazer before the meeting, and one of the things I've requested is the MSDS sheets on the, I have trouble with this word, so bear with me.
Hydrofluorosilicic acid.
Hydrofluorosilicic acid.
Fluoride product.
Fluoric. I'd like to see the MSDS sheets on that, which is health and safety sheets, and also would like to see one on fluoride in its natural state, because my specific question that can't be answered tonight, I've already been informed, is my concern is that we're talking about fluoridating the water, the drinking water for the community, but I do not believe that naturally occurring fluoride that's found in the soil is the same as this other product that comes from the scrubbers associated with a plant that makes fertilizer. So
Please refrain from applauding.
Yeah, because you're going to make me lose my train of thought here. So my concern is that I need to have a comfort level to understand that this material is the same material that we're putting in the drinking water of the community, because I drink it just like everybody else, and I've been drinking it for about 54 years. So that was my first item. My second one is I'm concerned about, and this isn't a question, it's just something I want to get out right now. I'm concerned about a miscommunication or lack of communication, because if I'm looking at the report that Ms. Barazer had the courtesy to go through pretty quickly for us, I'm a little upset about the first sentence, and I'm going to read it. The following report was developed in response to concerns raised about the practice of water fluoridation during citizens' communication at City Council meetings. I don't totally agree with this memorandum because I don't remember the exact date, but I think it was in August that some of the citizens came to this board during open citizens communication, basically stating that they had gone to the City Council meetings and really hadn't gotten any type of response. And so we basically asked for information from the City Council, and then I got a report, and the report I got this week wasn't even from city staff. It came from a Chronicle reporter who asked to interview me. I was uncomfortable in doing that because I hadn't had an opportunity to review the report. Thank you.
I'd like to respond, Mr. Moncada, to actually both of your concerns. That was the first question you had is an unanswered question for me, and we don't really have good answers for this form of fluoride. And then kind of circling back around to what you said about our request this summer. We requested that there be a study conducted by that would be outside, actually, not maybe it would involve some of the city staff and some of the city departments, but it would also involve outside scientific experts who could give us some, clearer information on it. And until this moment, we have not received any response to our request and to our recommendation, which we forwarded to council. So I have unanswered questions too, and I just wanted to agree with Mr. Moncada in the sense that we didn't have this report from staff in a timely fashion. I'm going to just put this in here right now. Another unanswered question is that actually the American Dental Association has changed their position regarding children and infants. That happened in 2006, and that hasn't been mentioned. They have cautioned the use of water that has fluoride in it in infant formulas. That is another, it seems like that's another unanswered question here. It looks also from the report, as I read it, that there is agreement among staff that there is a potential for problems at higher levels, the fluoride being used at higher levels. It seems that both the medical director and the environment and the watershed protection staff have mentioned that potential, that they don't think it's a problem now. They haven't had any evidence of that, but it could be in the future. There is also an agreement, it seems, from what I've read, that topical application works to prevent decay, but systemic application doesn't necessarily prevent tooth decay. These are all unanswered questions, and they came up when we had this discussion in the summer, and we've yet to get answers on this. The last one is that, let's see. No, I got that. Those are my unanswered questions. So, putting it out there. Other comments from the board? Yes, Mr. Moncada?
I remembered one more thing just now with your notes. We had the dentist that came down here and had a tube of toothpaste, specifically stating that it was hazardous to ingest the toothpaste because of the fluoride. So why would a product manufacturer put that kind of a warning label on toothpaste unless they were concerned about a health and safety issue?
Okay, so those are some concerns that we have. I don't know if there are other members of the board who have any other concerns on this issue, but I don't know if the staff wants to say anything about all those things at this point in time, but they are concerns. Yes, Mr. Ahart.
Well, I completely concur with Dr. Maxwell and Mr. Moncada. Being the way that I think, I have a process question, and that is, in the report it says that if the City Council desires to change its decision on fluoridation, it can do so by a simple majority vote of at least 4. Mm-hmm. Now, the report also states that the citizens voted on this issue. Mm-hmm. So could you help me understand that? Because my reading of the initiative and referendum says that it requires a supermajority, which would be 6 council members. And I mean, that may be strictly for an initiative. So I'm just trying to get clear on that piece.
I'm not the legal person, and I think the report may go into more detail, but it centers around how the referendum was initiated, and it was not initiated by, I think, a citizen write-in vote, so that changes the requirements for undoing it.
That's why it wasn't a supermajority, is because it wasn't a citizen-initiated referendum.
However, the citizens voted on the issue. Right. So help me explain. I mean, I'm trying to understand that piece. I worked on the City of Austin smoking ordinance, and I can tell you we collected signatures. We had to have that put on the ballot. And then once that passed, the city just passed a resolution to make that a law. I mean,
Right.
I know that this process may be a little different. However, it states that there was a vote taken on this issue. So I'm trying to understand the difference between the two.
My understanding, and again, I'm not a legal expert by any means, but my understanding of it is, in this case, the signatures from the citizens was not collected to put it on. It was a decision by council to put it on the referendum, and that changes how it can be undone.
That's my understanding as well. And since we have no legal representation here
We
this
didn't
evening.
think that one part would be a question, so I
Well,
apologize.
that's okay. That's all right.
That was actually better than the other version. There's
Pardon?
only 4 votes instead of 6. We thought that would go over well.
Yeah, I didn't have an opinion on
No,
4 is
just
better than 6.
question.
I just want a clarification on
Yeah.
the process. That was
And if
it.
you want, we can ask the attorney that put that section together to get a clarification of that issue to give to you.
Oh, I think it's been in writing. I've seen it in writing before. That's how I knew that that's what, so it's not
think
like
the-
we haven't received that information.
And I think the final part on the legal issues is the last part of that report, where I think it's only 1 page on there.
Yeah, I just want to clarify again. I just want a clarification on it, and I think it's been addressed, so thanks.
Thank you. Okay. So if there are no further questions from the board, we'll go to the citizens' communication. Thank you for your presentation, Ms. Barazer. Okay. Now, we've had more people sign up. And again, I'd like to repeat that we've heard the issue before. And we hope that you will take into consideration that we've heard it before. And if you hear someone speaking and saying the things you would like to say, just let us know that you concur with that person. That would be thoughtful. Just a minute. Sorry. One moment. Does the staff have anything further to add? Dr. Wong or Mr. Harrington? We'll go on and do that first. I thought you were just letting Ms. Barazer do the whole thing.
Well, I was just going to add one clarification that answers some of the questions that you had brought up regarding, for instance, why toothpaste might have some warning versus some other things. And just want to go through sort of, again, the dosage levels and to get perspective on what dosages we're talking about. So again, naturally occurring fluoride in the Austin water is estimated about 0.2 milligrams per liter to about 0.24. The CDC recommended levels, optimal recommended levels are about 0.7 to 1.2 milligrams per liter. What Austin is currently putting, the levels that are in the water system now are about 0.6 to 0.9, averaging about 0.75 milligrams per liter. Now, the EPA maximum contaminant level is 4.0 milligrams per liter. So the levels that you're talking about, that's 4 times the level that's in the Austin water. The secondary standard that was mentioned before, that's more for aesthetic purposes and concerns and dental fluorosis, is 2 milligrams per liter. So that's 2.0. So again, twice the level that's in the Austin water system. Now, you asked about toothpaste. Toothpaste has about 1,000 to 1,500 milligrams per liter. So that's where there's quite a difference in concentration. But the levels in the Austin water are at approximately 0.75 milligrams per liter. And so as you're hearing about some of the other studies, you're hearing about the EPA maximum contaminant levels, those are at 4 milligrams per liter, so quadruple the levels of what's in Austin water. So I just wanted that clarification. And as you're hearing about studies that look at adverse health effects, get that clarification that the levels that they're talking about are significantly higher than what is in the Austin water. Okay.
have a chance to
Okay.
respond.
I believe, did you, Mr. Ahart and then Mr. Moncada?
Thank you, Dr. Wong. I just have a question about, I think the big impetus for putting this in the water is to help with tooth health or teeth health. What level has been proven to aid in tooth health?
That would be the CDC optimal recommended level, which is 0.7 to 1.2. So actually the Austin water level being at 0.75 is at the low end of that CDC optimized level. Now the other aspect of it is, CDC has recognized this as really one of the 10 great public health achievements of the century because of its effect on dental caries and the reduction in dental caries. But the other aspect is that it is also almost a social equity issue, and that it's a way to efficiently reduce those inequalities in dental disease among all the different social strata.
Okay. So just to follow up, so then basically the recommended level that CDC has to promote tooth care, we are below that.
No, we're actually at that level. 0.75 is the average level of what Austin has, and the recommended is 0.7 to 1.2.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Moncada?
I sure am glad you decided to get up and had the opportunity to speak. Thank you. One of the questions I had, you brought information to me I was unaware of on toothpaste. 1,000 to 1,200
1,500.
1,500 milliliters?
Milligrams per liter.
Per liter. Oh, okay. So if that's the case, that's 1,000 times what CDC is requiring?
That would be for optimal levels for in a community water system.
So I guess my point's going to be, with the study that's been done, how much of that has really improved as far as health care for teeth, because you have fluoride in the toothpaste and people are more regularly brushing their teeth now than they were in the past. You have more disposable income, and you're teaching your children at a younger age how important dental hygiene is. So that's the first part of what I'm going to talk about. The second one dealt with Mr. Anderson being here on this river corridor. Having lived here all my life, there was a time when you couldn't eat the fish in Town Lake because of the heavy metals and phosphates associated with fertilizers and nitrates that basically accumulated in the river bottom because of the fact that we have dams that flow through, that basically block the river. So, naturally occurring fluoride, and then whatever potentially gets discharged back into the water course. Has anybody done a study on that accumulation and the cumulative effect of the fluoride? Because we actually pull water right out of the river, Lake Austin, that we treat in order to provide drinking water to the community.
Well, and I think that would be, covered with data of actually testing, and maybe Chris has something to add on that.
Thank you.
Oh, I just want Dr. Wong, I'd like to say one more thing. I want it to be clear that the toothpaste is topical.
Correct.
And the water is a systemic application of fluoride. And so, from what I understand, there has been improvement and reduction in decay with topical application of fluoride. That sounds like toothpaste to me. And I'm not so sure about, how effective having fluoride in water actually ends up being, because it talks about increased amount of fluoride in saliva as a result of fluoridation.
It is recognized as a safe and effective method.
Well, I don't have the information on that, and that's the thing. One of the reasons that I am saying these are unanswered questions for me. And
I guess I could say a CDC statement directly that water fluoridation in the proper amounts has been accepted as a safe, effective, and inexpensive method of preventing tooth decay.
Yes, I understand that. I've read that as well. That still doesn't answer my question, but you see, basically I'm kind of a researcher in that kind of stuff. That kind of statement isn't quite enough for me. I need to know more than that.
Well, Dr.
So that's okay.
In the 60s, the CDC also said it was all right to spray DDT for mosquitoes. And we all found out that that wasn't the case, 20 years later.
Mr. Beal.
In answer to your question, after doing some research on this, it appears that the remineralization of your tooth enamel occurs in the presence of low levels of fluoride. And so topical application with toothpaste once a day or twice a day is not as effective as if you drink it in your water and you have fluoride in your saliva, which helps with the remineralization of your teeth.
I appreciate your having that information, Mr. Beal, and having done that research. Good for you. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Wong. Did you have to say anything, Mr. Harrington?
We addressed those issues with what would the concentrations in the Colorado River downstream of our effluent discharge in the report. Effectively, the fluoride is concentrated in the wastewater effluent to concentrations about 2 milligrams per liter. Then that gets mixed with the natural Colorado River flows, and we modeled that by mass balance. And when we look at it versus the environmental effects concentrations, again, we come back to that same conclusion that we're not above levels that would be harmful to aquatic life based on the research that we've done. Your overarching question, are there sort of large-scale bioaccumulative effects? I haven't seen any research out there on large-scale bioaccumulation. Certainly fluoride can accumulate in bones and scales of fish, but again, there is fluoride naturally occurring in this system. We're talking about an elevation, a relatively small elevation of fluoride concentrations. So without any research to go on at the academic or at the national level, we're left looking at those sort of acute and chronic effects, and we just don't see the strong potential based on these concentrations.
When you do your testing, do you do that before or after they flush the river?
So we look at it actually in the effluent before it even touches the river, and then we look at it in the river downstream in a limited sense. That's done mostly by the USGS, and that's mostly older data. But we do look at it in the river upstream, directly in the river, and also in the intakes to the water treatment plants directly. So we're looking at it multiple sources.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, now we'll move to citizens communication. And Bill Keel is the first person signed up, which if you could come forward. I believe that Brent Brewer has given his 3 minutes to you, so you have 6 minutes. Welcome, Mr. Keel.
Thank you. I'll try to do it in 3 if I can. My name is Bill Keel. I'm not a resident of Austin. I'm from Alamo Heights. The reason I'm here this evening is until recently I was a council member for Alamo Heights for 4 years. During that time period, about a year and a half ago, we repealed fluoride. It had been passed 3 or 4 years earlier, never fully implemented. We were getting ready to implement it. It was going to be very expensive, and so we decided, let's figure out what this is about. I pursued that. I was actually, I wouldn't say I was pro-fluoride, but I was certainly maybe indifferent. I have a science background. I was a director of geoscience research for Shell before I retired. And I was surprised when I looked into it how inconsistent, how many contradictions there were in the case for fluoride, for fluoridation. Now let me say, I believe fluoride has benefits. I believe in the mechanisms that come from the inhibitions of demineralization, remineralization, and disrupting bacterial enzymes. I think all that is good, and I use fluoride toothpaste. But several things have been said this evening that I want to touch on, and I'll come back to how we got to the decision that we got to and give you some context, but I want to use this time to encourage you to ask some questions, which you don't appear to need much encouragement. When I read through the report, one thing I was a little surprised about is that it's missing some very important, relevant information. One of the most important things, and I encourage you to look into this, is the 2006 National Research Council report on fluoride in drinking water. That was commissioned by the EPA. They requested the National Academy of Sciences to look into the standards that you've heard about, the maximum contaminant standards, and to make recommendations. Now, in that report, these are the key things that you need to know. The first thing is they did recommend that those standards, those maximum contaminant standards, are too high. They were not permitted to recommend what they should be. They just said they were too high, and they mentioned numerous health effects that occur at levels significantly below 4, actually below 2. So that's one thing, very important to look at that. The other thing to know is that when we talk about concentrations of fluoride, we're sort of pretending like that's the only fluoride that we get, but it's not. And also in this report, they talk about where else do you get fluoride. You get it from background food, you get it from pesticides, you get it from a lot of sources. In fact, only 50% of the fluoride that you ingest comes from the fluoridated water. The other half comes from other sources. So we're not talking about 1 part per million. We may be talking about 2 parts per million or more. So that's another important thing to look at. The third, which Dr. Maxwell mentioned, was the formula, the connection with formula. They have a very good section on there. And that was shown to be excessive at 1 part per million for babies with formula. In fact, what's interesting, after this report came out, both the CDC and the ADA, American Dental Association, on their websites, caution against using formula with fluoridated water. It's on their websites, okay? So you can read that. Now, unfortunately, that's the only place it is. Frankly, I think this is the kind of thing that a water utility ought to let its people know. So I would recommend that you look more into that. So the issue of topical versus systemic, this is what was the flag for me when I read it. Because when I first started looking into it, I went to the ADA, I went to the CDC, and one of the things that you'll read on their websites is they admit and acknowledge that the benefit is topical because the mechanisms require contact with the teeth, okay? They admit that it's topical. Now, when I read that, I said, well, then why are we fluoridating if it's topical? Why are we doing this? Now, that's a whole other set of questions that I pursued. We went into that in depth, but I have no time to do that this evening. But that is a very important point to look into, topical versus systemic. The third point I want to leave you with, I was disappointed at how narrow the focus was of this report. Narrow in the sense that it could have been given 20 years ago. Literally, it could have been given 20 years ago, but there's a lot of things that have happened since then. You need to look around the world and see what's happened.
Excuse me, is that 3 minutes or 6 minutes? It's 6.
Okay.
So, okay.
Well, anyway, just look at what's happened in the rest of the world, what the rest of the world is doing. I think it's relevant, and I'll just leave it at that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anybody have any questions here? Okay. The next person is Ray Nadler-Olnick. You have 3 minutes.
Dr. Huang brought up the subject of social equity. And since he did, I would like to call to your attention this rare and hard-to-get report of the Texas Dental Association, December 2008, so recent. And in it, they talk about the endemic tooth problems, decay, and other poor oral health among low-income people in Texas, specifically. It's based on the 2000 Surgeon General's report for the whole country, which says the same thing. Fluoride is not doing anything to help low-income people's teeth. That is a myth. And it falls hardest on minority people for whatever reason. Now, Mr. Moncada was talking about the MSDS sheets for fluorosilicic acid that we use as opposed to natural forms of fluoride, and he need go no farther than to the website of the vendor, Lucier Chemicals. That's LCILTD.com. And you can download the MSDS sheets for both the chemical that we use, fluorosilicic, and sodium fluoride, a natural form that's also used in some places, though very few, for water fluoridation. They're both nasty, and it's not easy to tell by reading those MSDS sheets which one is the worst. However, some research has just come to my attention that indicates that the fluorosilicic version of it, that is the man-made version of it, is worse. It facilitates the uptake of lead to the body, and it falls, for some reason, disproportionately on blacks. It's worse for blacks. And I can get that research for anyone who is curious about it. I have access to those articles in medical journals, neurophysiology, and I will provide one for anybody who would really like to look at the research. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Olnick. Appreciate it. The next person is Neil Carman, Dr. Neil Carman, and Mr. Olnick, Walter Olnick, has given you his 3 minutes, so you have 6 minutes, Dr. Carman. And don't start until he gets these handed out. This will not be part of your 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair Maxwell. My name is Neil Carman with the Sierra Club, and I'm very concerned about the report that the city issued. I found that there's numerous omissions, and I want to go through some of them. I think you'll find some of them interesting, that they've not all been covered here, but I'm not going to go through all the details of these omissions. And this is very preliminary. There's many omissions. The first one I found is that hydrofluorosilicic acid is an extremely dangerous and deadly chemical that's used in Austin. There was no mention, for example, of the material safety data sheets of how dangerous this chemical is. Number two is the fact that hydrofluorosilicic acid is also one of the most dangerous chemicals transported in Austin if there were to be a serious accident and a breaching of the container on the highway or the city streets. And a lot of people don't know the hazards associated with a spill and a breaching of one of these tankers that goes right through the city of Austin and to the treatment plants. Number three, the chemical used in the artificial water fluoridation by the city of Austin contains other toxic chemicals such as lead, mercury, cadmium, and arsenic. We don't even know all the chemicals that are in it. So this is not a single chemical. It's a smorgasbord, a toxic cocktail of very harmful chemicals. Number four, artificial water fluoridation chemical used by Austin is classified by the Environmental Protection Agency as a hazardous waste. Why would anybody want to put a toxic hazardous waste from industrial manufacturing plants in the drinking water supply? This is not a very bright idea. Number 5, the fluoride chemical added to the Austin water is not pharmaceutical-grade chemical. It's an industrial-grade chemical with a lot of toxic impurities in it. It's unthinkable that you would put an industrial-grade toxic substance in the food, in a drug, in the water supply. Number 6, there's a lack of peer-reviewed science in this report by the city. The National Research Council's report in 2006 had 1,100 peer-reviewed studies. The city cited 3 out of their 14 on health effects. Number 6, the synergistic effects of fluoride with lead, aluminum, and iodine cause differences in the way it's absorbed in the body. For example, fluoride causes an inhibition of the acetylcholine esterase enzyme, which is very important in acetylcholine neuron transmission in the body. Also, fluoride increases aluminum uptake in the body. And also, it's a known endocrine disrupting agent impacting the pineal gland and the thyroid. Number 7, the bioavailability differences between industrial fluoride added to the water and the natural fluorides was completely ignored. And that is, how are these fluorides absorbed into the body and how do they impact, for example, the metals? Number 9, recent carcinogenicity research with fluoride links to osteosarcoma, such as was demonstrated a few years ago at Harvard University by a team of Forest Sciences. There was no mention of new research just out this year linking fluoride to osteosarcoma. Number 10, fluoride dose from the drinking water is not controlled or evaluated by the city. Number 11, sensitive subpopulations at risk to fluoride dosage and exposure would include diabetics, kidney patients, infants, people with osteoarthritis, athletes, people who consume a lot of water. That was completely ignored by the city. Infant risks of fluoride, as you noted, the American Dental Association put a release out nearly 3 years ago raising issues with infants. A big one is number 13, fluoridated drinks and foods. There's hundreds of beverages and foods sold in Austin every day that contain fluoride, or they're made with fluoridated water. That was completely ignored. Number 14, fluoridated prescription drugs. In 1990, according to a review I read, there were 220 drugs, prescription drugs containing fluorine. There was no mention of that. People in Austin are taking fluorinated drugs, pharmaceutical drugs, prescribed by their doctors. Another one is the acute or chronic toxicity in the toothpaste. Now, of course, that has been pointed out that there's a lot more in the toothpaste, but I would point out that there's enough fluoride in a tube of toothpaste to kill a child. So when we start talking about what should be in the water, as far as, a difference between the maximum contaminant level, I think it should be 100 times lower than the 4 level that the EPA suggests is probably not even safe anymore. So the city only goes maybe twice below that. We should be 100 times lower if you want an adequate margin of safety to protect public health. There's many confounding variables that the city didn't consider in the staff's report. Number 17, there's been no epidemiological study in Austin to evaluate the effects of fluoride. I think if you're going to want to look for whether there is or are not adverse health effects, you would need to do an epidemiological study to conclude that. There's been no such study. There hasn't really been one on this chemical in the United States. Safety studies on fluoride, including an epidemiological study, are needed in the United States on this specific fluoride chemical. And some scientists suggest that the safe level of fluoride should be 0 or close to 0. I would just also point out the city didn't mention anything about the fact that fluoride is bioaccumulative poison. It's an enzyme poison. And there's Nobel Prize winners, at least 14, who have opposed fluoridation. One in 2000, Dr. Arvid Carlson, is a Nobel Prize winner in medicine and physiology.
Dr. Carmen, your time's up.
Thank you.
Yeah, just a moment. What? And you are who? Okay, you now have 3 more minutes.
Okay.
Travis Snavely gave
the
you
city
time.
didn't mention that in the last few years there's been over 200 cities in the U.S. that have rejected fluoridation or decided to stop it, has the former council member from Alamo Heights mentioned. The city did not mention the environmental devastation from the phosphate or strip mining in Florida, which it covers almost huge areas of counties in central Florida. Then they take that mined ore, they run it through these phosphate fertilizer manufacturing plants. They get this wet scrubber residue containing the hydrofluorosilicic acid and all the other toxic impurities. And I think that's a big concern because that was completely ignored by the city. I think there's a big question mark about the purity. The city says this goes through some kind of a refining process. It's very nebulous. There's a lot of skepticism that it's really not refined. If it was refined, why would you find other impurities such as lead, mercury, arsenic, cadmium, and so forth? And a concern about radionuclides. As I mentioned in August, this ore that's mined, according to the EPA's website, is loaded with radionuclides. And therefore, the EPA doesn't want this stuff put in the water supply, in the air, on the land. There's huge piles of this radioactive phosphogypsum in Florida near these phosphogypsum manufacturing plants. Fluoride is also linked to oxidative stress in biochemical systems, such as ours or plants or other animals. And there was no mention of these kinds of adverse health effects, including oxidative stress. I would also point out that although the city, notes that there is a third-party entity that does this audit, there's a big question mark. It's not any kind of a state or federal regulatory body. And so who audits this regulatory body, since it's pretty much a private, non-profit company? I think there's a major concern about that. But overall, the city's review doesn't deserve a passing grade. I taught up at the university. I graded hundreds of papers by students. This paper would not pass an undergraduate course in the biological sciences, in my opinion. The references in here, it's fine to cite the Texas Department of Health, but where are the peer-reviewed studies that any scientists at the state health department have done? There's been none done by the city, and like I pointed out, there's Nobel Prize winners in medicine and physiology and chemistry over the last 50 years. Especially a number of them are enzyme biochemists who think that this is not a good thing. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Coleman. James Wilson, you have 3 minutes.
I wanted to open by first saying thank you for being here and for giving us a place to have our voices heard. Public service is frequently demanding and almost always thankless, so try to remedy that a little bit. I'd like to address briefly Dr. Wong's statement about there being 1,000 parts per million fluoride in toothpaste. Clearly, that's bad. No one would ever want to eat about a tube of toothpaste. But there's a volume requirement, too. We talked about concentrations. So if there's 1,000 parts per million, then if you just use 1,000 times as much toothpaste, then it would come down to 1 part per million, which is about what's in Austin's water. So let me rephrase this a little bit. 1 milliliter of toothpaste would be a really big glob of toothpaste. I think it's about twice as much as you'd use. And that would be about as much fluoride as is in 2 of these water bottles of Austin City water. So if you're not comfortable eating a big dose of toothpaste, you shouldn't be comfortable drinking about twice this much Austin tap water. It's an active city. We have a lot of cyclists and bikers, runners. People drink a lot of it. Just because the concentration is low, we drink a lot. A low dose of something bad that we drink a lot of is going to build up. It's not good for you. I had a few notes, but in the interest of everyone getting home in time to see their families, I'll stop now. Thank you very much for hearing us.
Thank you. Thank you. Robert Lohr. There's a what? There's a B. It's Love. Oh, Robert Love?
Now, breaking apart from convention, may I ask the doctor questions, since good citizens who have read about this weren't able to specifically ask him questions and get answers?
It'll be part of your 3 minutes.
Great. Dr. Wong, may I ask you a few things? And may I ask for your responses to be brief so that way I can ask a couple questions? Now, Doctor, you like the CDC website. I like that website, too. It tells us a lot of good stuff. One of them is that we get fluoride for our water from a very clever source, which is a co-product of the phosphate industry. Now, that's a byproduct of the phosphate industry, which we know is toxic. They can't dispose of it in normal ways. Doctor, would you knowingly consume a toxic substance that is too toxic to be thrown away in a trash can?
Well, that's I would not knowingly consume something that I know is going to be toxic to me. So.
Wonderful. As a new father of 2 young children, a boy and a girl, we had twins, very happy about that. I'm still not having a very large income, and not looking at the CDC's website, I don't want to use fluoridated water for formula. Should I be required to purchase bottles of water for my children's health, not to mention my wife and my own health?
Again, in terms of your being required to do anything, it would be your choice. And again, it sounds, there is information about that. As you're purchasing your formula, I suppose you would purchase whatever else you need to make the formula appropriate.
But I'm trying to follow the CDC's recommendation. They say don't give fluoridated water to infants. That's what I'm trying to do. It's very expensive, especially for the lower class, who we say this benefits. You said that, right? This benefits the lower class more?
Well, I think the point was that it is a method that gets that social equity in terms of the benefits on dental caries, so that the populations aren't having to buy toothpaste and other products.
So we don't want the lower class buying toothpaste?
No, here's the thing. If you're going to ask him questions, you're not going to interrupt as he gives an answer. So I need for you to be courteous.
I apologize. You just said they buy less toothpaste. You're saying...
You need to be courteous and let him finish.
So we don't want them buying toothpaste now?
No, I think that's not what I said.
But you just said they can buy less toothpaste because they fluoridate their water.
I said what fluoridation of water is an effective, and it provides it to the entire community. So there is that sense. Again, it's protecting the entire community, which is a good thing. That's why it's one of the reasons why it's recommended by CDC. It's a way that we can provide that protection to everyone.
Thank you, Dr. Wong. Okay, your time is up. Your 3 minutes is up.
Thank you.
Thank you. Russell Doyle. The next person is Linda Green, so if you could be ready to come up so we don't have to wait as you walk up, it would help us. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to quote from Health and Nutrition Secrets by Dr. Russell Blaylock, a neurosurgeon and professor of medicine. Robert Carlton, Ph.D., a former EPA scientist, said, "Fluoridation is the greatest case of scientific fraud of this century." William Marcus, Ph.D., senior EPA toxicologist, said, "Regarding fluoridation, the EPA should act immediately to protect the public, not just on the cancer data, but on the evidence of bone fractures, arthritis, mutagenicity, and other effects." And EPA headquarters has completely banned fluoride from its building, not even in the wastewater. They will not let any fluoride into their building. Dr. Blaylock, neurosurgeon, says, "As it stands, there is in fact no credible evidence that fluoride added to the water supply reduces cavity rates at all, and several studies have convincingly demonstrated that the incidence of cavities is actually higher in fluoridated areas." Dr. Dean Burke, former chief chemist of the National Cancer Institute, and Dr. John Yamionis said they compared 10 cities, 10 fluoridated, 10 non-fluoridated, and they concluded that the death rate in the fluoridated cities is 10%. There's a 10% increase in cancer deaths following the first 13 to 17 years of fluoridation. Page 107, there's a 33 to 50% increase in oral cancer. Page 108, bone cancer in young males increased 70% with fluoridation of drinking water. Page 109, Dr. Wolfgang Klein demonstrated that cells exposed to 1 part per million fluoride exhibit a 50% reduction in DNA repair enzyme activity. And if the DNA damage is in the reproductive cells, it transfers to children. We're transferring DNA damage to children by putting 1 part per million fluoride in the water, according to Dr. Wolfgang Klein. That's page 109. Page 113, 114, Chinese research showed that the number of children having IQs below 70 increased as much as 21% in fluoridated towns. They did several tests on fluoridated versus non-fluoridated cities. Their conclusion was, Dr. Blaylock and his summary of their research was that the number of highly intelligent children was decreased and the number of severely impaired children was increased with fluoridation. I'd like to add that 90% of Europe does not fluoridate. And as far as social equity, the poor are unaware of the dangers of fluoride. They do not have the money to buy the expensive filters. That is not social equity. It's putting this damage on the poor.
Thank you, sir. Linda Green. The next person would be Katie Brewer. Be prepared to be up here. I'd appreciate it.
I, too, would like to give out a handout. Last week's Chronicle, November 27th, had an article called Fluoride Fact and Fiction. And while I don't agree with everything that's in the magazine, it does have some useful information, so I'm just going to hand it here and pass it down in case you didn't get a chance to see it. I started speaking to City Council in February of this year about fluoride versus organic gardens and how it's really impossible for us to have organic gardens in Austin if our water's full of fluoride. And I find it ironic that the Clean Water Act was passed, I believe, in 1972, and that our citizens were bamboozled in believing that this particular fluoride would be good for their teeth. I seriously doubt that when the referendum was being pushed back in the early 70s, whether people were told then that this fluoride was going to be coming from the toxic phosphate fertilizer industry. And everybody's so fond of talking about parts per million. I have a document here from December 18th, 1975, and it's for the following bid for freight charges. And it says Chemtech Industries in the sum of $11,200 for government-approved freight charges for a 12-month supply of this fluorosilicic acid, and it's 160 tons for 1 year. One 12-month supply, 160 tons. I think there's 2,000 pounds in a ton. Does anybody want to verify that? So we've got 32,000 pounds of water going into the fluoride going to the water in December 18th, 1975. I'd like to ask the Environmental Board to get the statements for all the freight charges from 72 until the present and see how many tons goes into our water. Most of us live in either a floodplain or downstream. So this water accumulates and accumulates and accumulates. And when you talk about remineralization of teeth and how fluoride improves that, What's keeping those minerals from going into my thyroid gland, my brain, children's brains? They say there's an epidemic of autism. Every 20 minutes a child is now diagnosed with autism. There's an epidemic of Alzheimer's. And maybe it has to do with what we're drinking, what we eat and drink, and what's put into our water. And so...
The time's up. I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Excuse me? And you are?
Thank you.
You now have 3 more minutes.
So back in November of this year, I called the city water utility department. I was so upset when I saw Jody Slagle on TV saying that he uses dillo dirt in his own garden. And the dillo dirt comes from the fluoridated water along with other toxins. So I asked Kevin, and I've asked our city council as well in November, to let us see the test results for dillo dirt, the fluoride that's in the dillo dirt, the heavy metals that's in dillo dirt, and the pharmaceutical drugs that's in dillo dirt. And I have not gotten an answer from either the council or from Kevin Anderson, Jody Slagle. Jody Slagle has not retracted his statement that dillo dirt's good, even though on the bag it says dillo dirt should not be used for your vegetable garden. So I feel like we are being ripped off by organizations that are supporting the big agribusiness, and that the CDC speaks with a forked tongue. On the one hand, they say fluoride is the best thing since sliced bread. On the other hand, they say babies should get 0 fluoride. And so I hope that you will stand up for us, because the city council is not, nor is our city. And one other thing, Jane Barrazer did say that fluoride is not a disinfectant, so I don't know how it's killing all these bacteria in our teeth. And I appreciate that she acknowledges that this is a waste product. And I would hope that you would look at European studies maybe, because, as someone said previously, 98% of Europe has looked at current science, not the woo-woo science of the 70s, and they have stopped adding fluoride to the water. And here in our town, we have dirt, dust, and mud, and we have this fluoride in our dillo dirt. And if it's not dirt, it turns into dust, which we're breathing. Then when it turns into mud, the ACL kids are rolling around in these toxic chemicals that I know for sure have caused rashes and diarrhea and vomiting after being exposed to about 12 hours of dillo dirt in our ACL park. So I don't even think it should be used on parks, let alone vegetable gardens. And I would hope that you would really get an independent counsel to look at this. And I'd like to also give you this. I haven't contacted these people, but there's a lab, Texas Plant and Soil, and maybe they could test our dillo dirt and see how much fluoride, heavy metals, and pharmaceutical drugs are in that. And maybe we'll have cleaner, safer water with your help. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Green. Katie Brewer. And the next person is John Bush, and Mary Krennick has given John 3 extra minutes, so John Bush is after Katie Brewer. Welcome.
Hi. I just want to say that I really appreciate you guys, and it's been very interesting to watch. You're paying attention, and that you're actually listening to what people say, which is very rare in the city council, so I really appreciate it. 2 years ago, when I had a baby, I was off of work, and I had heard about this fluoride issue, and I'd always thought that fluoride was great, so I did some heavy research because I didn't believe what I was hearing, that fluoride was always good for us, and I'm standing here today because I got proved wrong through lots of reading and research. One of the things I wanted to say from Dr. Wong's, he was talking about, but it's only 1,000 parts per minute, so it's okay to poison me slowly. Just don't poison me quickly. I got it. Okay. So another thing about, I keep hearing, the CDC, the CDC. Well, what comes to mind is I'm with the federal government and I'm here to help. And Mr. Bill didn't give any study, he just said that this was the case. I'd really like, if you have this knowledge, to please share it with your members here. One of the things I want to touch on is that the lower class, which has been said before, can't afford to remove it. And the 3 ways that you can remove fluoride: you cannot boil it out, you cannot freeze it out, you have to either buy water, which has its own issues because the plastic leaches into the water, and then you don't know where exactly that water is coming from. And number 2, you have to buy or rent an expensive reverse osmosis to have in your home, which again, it has issues because it takes all trace minerals out, and you have to supplement with seaweed or some other nutrients. And then you can distill it, which has its own set of issues for this water. But these are the 3 ways that you can remove it. So me as a mom, I have my children here. She's 2 now, but I did this 2 years ago. I was like, okay, what am I going to do? What are my options to do this? The rich can afford these things. They can afford the supplements. They can afford to get water. And then the doctor, the scientist here brought a whole nother thing I haven't even thought of, about my body, my skin being the largest organ of our bodies, and we're bathing it. So yeah, we're using reverse osmosis, the little tap, the little separate thing on your sink that you're drinking, or, your bottled water, your distiller. Well, what about the shower? What about that? That's a whole nother thing I haven't even thought of. I'm like, oh great, what have I been doing with that? So here we go. So there's also a disease called fluorosis, which I have from, just like you guys saying that you drank it when you were little. I have fluorosis of my teeth because when I was younger, and my mother, being 18 when she had me, had no idea about this, and the studies weren't out in 2006. I was born in 75. So now I have problems with my teeth because of fluoride. I didn't even get to half the stuff up.
Excuse me. And okay. You are? Matt Buckley, you now have 3 more minutes.
Thanks. 32% of the from the American Dental Association says that children have abnormal discoloration from molting enamel, which is what I have, 32%, and this is from fluoride. There's another issue with the drugs, the toxins, the chemicals, the poison, whatever you want to call this. It's going in my body, and I don't have a choice of it. And who's to say how much my body can handle from the child, from the 10-year-old, from the 70-year-old? And if I drink a lot more water than someone else that's smaller, how do they know how much fluoride people are getting from the different ages and body types? If this is a drug, shouldn't that be administered by a doctor as a prescribed substance that he can watch and see how your body reacts to it? People, please consider making this Austin City Council get an independent review. Just saying that, hey, the federal government's here to help, listen to the CDC, don't worry about it, y'all don't think for yourself, don't listen to any of these people, any of the doctors, any of the citizens of Austin, just listen to the federal government and the CDC and everything's going to be fine. Just do that. Make them do an independent review. Make them prove it to you. Because I tried 2 years ago and I found the truth. It is poison. Show me, prove to me that it's safe. Stand with the people, normal citizens out there. Don't stand for corporate chemical companies. Don't stand for the federal government saying it's okay, we don't really want to mess with it. Stand with the 200 cities that just flipped and took fluoride out of their system. This is your chance right now, these individuals right here, to be a living hero for the citizens of Austin.
Thank you. John Bush, you have 6 minutes.
Good evening. I just want to echo a great thanks too. This is the first environmental board meeting that I've been to, but a lot of my fellow citizens here have come quite often, and y'all have been quite responsive, and we greatly appreciate your recommendation for the independent review. It's unfortunate that it wasn't actually independent, but I guess we're getting used to that here in this wonderful city. I also want to give a special thanks to Linda Green and Ray, because they have been wholeheartedly pushing this And they've been coming up just about every Thursday when we could actually come every Thursday. And they've been speaking to the council, and unfortunately their calls have fallen on deaf ears time and time again. There was even one instance where they had a vote earlier that morning, and the citizens' communication is supposed to be two-way, and they failed to even mention that they had just renegotiated because, of course, the price of the fluoride is going up. I wanted to go over a little bit of the science that's already been reiterated. More importantly, I want to talk about the reality of why, the question why water is being fluoridated. Because I know I've seen y'all up here, and some of the statements y'all have made are the very same ones I would have made. And I recognize that you guys, your questions, you're concerned. You're starting to see through this illusion that is the benefits of fluoridation, and I appreciate that a great deal. So I'm going to tell you why it is that this is happening, because I think the case has been made very strongly, especially by Dr. Neil Carman there, the omissions there alone, that the negative effects of fluoridation far outweigh the positive benefits, and to me that's what it boils down to. So the question, okay, well then why is there such a push for the fluoridation? Well, we can start in their water fluoridation report. The first line in the executive summary, in 1951, the U.S. Public Health Service began promoting water fluoridation. So was the CDC. So the question arises, what happened in that general time frame? Well, I'll tell you what happened. The Manhattan Project happened shortly before then. The Cold War began, and we began pumping up our creation of nuclear weapons in order to compete with the USSR. Well, in order to the refinement process, the enrichment of the uranium that they used in the atomic bombs at that time, they used a whole lot of fluoride in order to push that. So here's what happened. People started getting sick. This was also occurring in the aluminum melting and steel industry as well. So rather than halt the production of our United States war machine, because people were starting to get sick, people were starting to sue, people were starting to call the question, they decided to hire a gentleman by the name of Edward L. Bernays, nephew of Sigmund Freud, father of modern propaganda, to sell to the American public the idea that fluoridation of water is beneficial. That's what's going on right now. We are now living out the deception that took place in the late 40s, early 50s. We're still living it out today. The science has come out. Again, Dr. Neil Carman and several people have reported it to you. The gentleman and the lady from speaking on behalf of the city keep referring back to the CDC, the CDC, the CDC. I'm sure everybody is well aware that the government apparatus, the state institutions are easily managed by lobbyists from industry. And while it was the Manhattan Project in the past, the aluminum companies, now we see it coming from big agra through the phosphate fertilizer company. Rather than them having to pay, they say that the solution to pollution is dilution. So rather than them having to pay to get rid of it and to according to EPA standards, they simply put it in the water of all of the nation, and it's happening right now. And the science, again, is out there. But unfortunately, the city bureaucracy is unwilling to challenge the status quo for whatever reason. I believe people just don't generally like to shake up the feathers of the system very much. They want to be comfortable and maintain their position or work their way up the ladder. But unfortunately for we the people, our voice continues to fall upon deaf ears. So we're calling on you as our representatives in the Environmental Board. You weren't elected, but you were appointed by our elected representatives. We're calling on you to stand with the people. Again, Ray and Linda have tirelessly tried to get this through to the city council, but they continue to ignore us. So again, I see it in you. I know you guys are real human beings, not that the city council's not, but I can see it in your eyes that you're concerned and you're beginning to see the reality of what's going on here because, again, you're very susceptible to the message and they've had a lot of opportunity, a lot of people that have spoken before you. So I urge you to stand with the people and ensure that we genuinely have an independent review to convince you, because I know y'all are right there on the precipice of genuinely believing that this is actually less beneficial than they would have us to believe. So I'd ask that if you were to come up with another independent review to continue push, we'll help. We'll start a phone call campaign. We'll start a lobbying campaign. That's in the works right now. But we need you guys' help because y'all are the authoritative board on this issue. I'd ask that a gentleman like Neil Carman or somebody, a citizen, could be on that independent review. Again, it's not independent. What the city manager's office did was they preempted it. I'm going to be real with you. This is my assumption. They saw that, an independent review is going to come up. Time and time again in other cities, the truth comes out, reality comes out. They can't deceive us anymore, so they went ahead and preempted it on their own, which is rather unfortunate because it's the exact opposite of what you called on them to do. So we do have the opportunity to further compel them, and we will be doing that on the citizen side. But again, we ask that the Environmental Board stand with us, and then once that independent review, a genuine independent review, is done with peer review and with epidemiological studies, we would ask that you, the Environmental Board, will stand with the people in suggesting and recommending that the City Council stop the process of fluoridation, because I think the evidence is out there. And thank you again, and we hope that you stand with us.
Thank you, Mr. Bush. Thank you. Okay, we've heard the citizens speak on this, and so I'm going to close the public hearing if there's no objection from the board, and we'll have discussion or a motion, or both.
Dr. Maxwell?
Yes, Mr. Moncada.
If I can be recognized, I have a motion, but I also want to state that I believe this board, which is an advisory board, did make this request to the City Council back in August for a report, but unfortunately, I have to concur with the community that the report is skewed and it's very limited, so I have a motion to read into the record. Agenda item 4B, briefing on the water fluoridation report. I'm making a request, and I don't know if I should call this a second request, that the City Council supplement the water fluoridation report dated 11/13/2009 that did not address numerous questions asked by the Environmental Board and citizens who also have a scientific background. I have two Environmental Board conditions. One, that staff and council review omissions of science information provided by Neil J. Carmen, Ph.D. with the Sierra Club. And I believe Mr. Murphy got a copy of that information with all of the omissions. My second condition is that the City Council move forward with my original request and provide us an independent study. And my rationale is that there is a lack of information in the initial report.
Is there a second to Mr. Moncada's motion?
I'll second that.
Seconded by Mr. Ahart. Okay, now, is there discussion on the motion? Mr. Beal.
I'm not prepared to have a request that this be studied or come from the Environmental Board. I do not personally feel capable of making the scientific evaluations that are required. Some of the things that we have heard this evening are a bit misleading and contrary to what it was very easy to find. Unfortunately, Google makes it possible to look up some of these reports that we hear about. We heard that something called osteosarcoma is a problem. Well, it was studied for 15 years by Harvard, and the link between fluoride and osteosarcoma was tenuous, and that there are only a total of 400 cases in the United States per year. And they don't know where it comes from, but it does not appear to be caused by fluoride.
Do you have something else to add?
Yeah, the fluorosis problem apparently is just a very, in most cases, mild discoloration of teeth. It's not a serious health problem. It can be in high doses of fluoride, but it is more of a cosmetic, and most of the time you can't even detect it unless you get down and look with a magnifying glass. I would like to not move forward on this motion, at least because there are so many questions in my mind about some of the claims that we hear.
Mr. Ahart.
Thank you, Dr. Maxwell. I just want to say I don't think this motion is stating that this environmental board is saying that we should remove fluoride, continue using fluoride, but I do think this motion is saying that this is a critical issue. I don't know anybody in this city that doesn't drink tap water. And, you know, my doctor tells me I should divide my weight in half and drink that many ounces of water to be healthy. So I think this motion really is about getting down to the facts. I really want to hear the health department tell us beyond a shadow of a doubt that this has no negative health impact on people. We haven't heard that. So I think this motion will actually get us the information we need to continue to educate the public about this, and then make a more informed decision about this process that's been going on since 1973. I'm one of those people that's been drinking this water my whole life. So, I mean, I think it's very critical. And so that's why I'm wholeheartedly supporting this motion.
Other comment, Mr. Moncada.
Mr. Beal, as a maker of the motion, I want to remind, and it's in the public record, I specifically stated at the beginning of my motion that we were an advisory board. So basically, we don't make the decision. And the second thing is, just reiterating what Mr. Ahart stated, what I'm actually looking for is more information. And that's what this motion is about. And a lack of open communication.
Mr. Beal, you want to answer that?
Well, I would like to hear the wording again to make sure that it in no way advocates one side or the other on this.
Okay. As an advisory board, I request that the City Council supplement the water fluoridation report dated 11/13/2009 that did not address numerous questions asked by the Environmental Board and citizens who also have scientific backgrounds. My conditions were that the staff and the council review omissions of science or scientific information provided by Neil Carman, Ph.D. with Sierra Club. And I also reiterated and verified that Mr. Murphy had a copy of that handout so they would have an opportunity to review all of those questions, because I'm not going to state that everything I read in there is correct, but it did make me question the report that was provided to us. And then my original motion that you did support, I believe, back in August, I had specifically asked for an independent study. And, you know, that is something that I am requesting, but that's a part of the supplemental information that I believe we need. And my rationale was that there was a lack of information in the initial report. That was neither favoring one side or the other. It was stating that the information wasn't as transparent as I would like for it to be, where I would be comfortable reviewing it. And that's my motion.
Okay, Ms. Neely.
I honestly think the proper venue for this might be to ask our congresspeople to request a peer study and an analysis either by the Surgeon General or the CDC. I think this is sort of above our pay grade, I guess is what I would say. I don't think we have the ability, even if the questions are answered that we've asked, where does that leave us? What are we going to request further information? Are we going to request the City Council stop fluoridation? I mean, it's just, I think this is beyond what we really are and decisions that we really want to get involved in. And I think the true level that this needs to be addressed is at a federal level with either the Surgeon General and
please refrain from making comments.
So that's just my thinking right now, and that's the way I'm thinking and feeling.
Thank you, Ms. Neely. Please, can you refrain from making comments? I would like to say something. I actually think that decisions have been made on the city levels to change this, and they haven't gone through the federal level to do that. And it's not necessarily, I don't see it as being necessarily dependent on the federal level changing their position on something for the individual cities to act on their own. But my concern about all of this is, see if I can do this succinctly. We had an opportunity in the summer to have a thorough discussion. We had a lot of input from citizens. We had some concerns as a board. We asked for an independent study that would be based in science. We asked that from the council. The city staff was directed by the city manager to do a study within the departments of the city. No mention was ever made that the environmental board made this request. The dots were not connected. That puts us in a very awkward position. And we knew nothing about this report until Mr. Ahart actually heard that this was happening rather informally. That puts our board in a difficult position. And I just want people to understand that. We were trying to do something that didn't need to get escalated to the point where we are now. This could have been avoided. And I want that to be in the record, because that's the thing that gets to me the most, is we did not have to have it come to this level of escalation at this point, and it didn't have to come back to our board had our board's request even been responded to in any way, shape, or form. So I'm just registering my extreme displeasure at this outworking of this effort that we made in all honesty and in goodwill. We were not doing anything that was conflictual or subversive or anything else. We just were asking for something. So I'm just putting this out there and registering it, that this makes me very disturbed. It's very hard to be the chair of a board that's been put in this position, and I just want everybody to understand that. Okay, any other comments? All right, we'll move to a vote. So, all in favor of the motion as stated by Mr. Moncada, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Mr. Anderson? Okay. Ms. Gary, Mr. Ahart, Mr. Moncada, and myself in favor, and those opposed, Mr. Beal, Ms. Neely, and Mr. Anderson. Motion carries. Thank you very much.